All right, everyone, our next presenter is Mark Bruhn from Ren Isaac. He's going to be talking about information sharing and cybersecurity, fitting the puzzle together. Thank you, Mark.
There we go. There we go. These next couple of slides have very little to do with my presentation. I just thought they were just great. I don't know who made these, but the landscape is craggy enough, right? So you can read my bio, of course, in the materials. We won't waste any of your time going through that. The Ren Isaac is now, how old? 2001. Our current president, President Michael McRobbie, and I founded the Ren Isaac in 2001. We'll get a little bit more into that. But there's some preliminary information that I think we should go through to get there. And some of this is, I think, me commiserating with all of you about some of the things that we're dealing with. And David and Marianne set me up quite nicely with their presentation earlier, and we'll just take off on some of that. But just to go through these really nifty, craggy, landscapey sorts of things. That was nifty, right? Okay, so where's my overview here? There we go. All right, so some of these things, again, commiserating, right? So you know what you know, and you don't know what you don't know, right? So there's if you watch those Hotels.com commercials, there's a Captain Obvious statement, if I ever saw one, right? Because what you're dealing with on a daily basis is the fact that you have your sphere of information, and then as something may happen to you, you find out that your sphere of information is too small for what you need to do. And then if you don't know what you don't know, then tailoring your resources to cover what you have to cover is not at all possible. So here's a question for you. It'll be very interesting to see how many people sort of own up to this, but how many of you would claim that you have all of the resources that you need to cover all of the assets that you need to cover? Yeah, exactly. And so if you don't have the resources to cover the assets that you have to cover, then again, a Captain Obvious statement. How do you cover the assets that you need to cover? And how do you know that you're not over-covering, that is, over-protecting, over-defending things that don't need to be defended that way? So this is the fundamental problem that we're trying to solve, is with limited resources, identifying those critical assets that you need to cover given the resources that you have to spend. And I'm not suggesting you ignore other assets, though there may be some of those that you want to ignore or can ignore. It's just that you treat a lot of the other assets sort of lightly. So you need to know what you need to know, and you need to have a variety of information resources in order to find out what you need to know. And so if you pay attention to the wrong information resources, and either David or Marianne said this in their presentation earlier, then you're going to be applying the wrong information, you're getting the wrong information, you're giving the wrong information. And so I added this simply because I really like that picture. So we all know, as we worked in this space for as long as some of us have, I've been working in this space for, well, not counting my military days, over 30 years. And you know that everything that you do has almost an immediate reaction, right? It's almost always a negative reaction, but there's always a reaction, correct? And so your job as security professionals is to apply the appropriate amount of defense without causing an inordinate amount of inconvenience, right? Everybody should have this tattooed on their left arm or something, because this is what we're expected to do day in and day out. So we just implemented at Indiana University, where I'm from, of course, we implemented two-factor authentication using Duo, and it's gone over surprisingly well. Sometimes I look at the CIO and he looks at me, and we think, well, when's the next shoe going to drop? Because it actually went quite well. Though a group of involved, engaged students created a anti-duo Facebook page, which is their want to do, right? Students will take to social media when they want to protest something, and it had everything in there about inconvenience and all of that. But by and large, it was rolled out, I think, well. The communication was done well. But you have to realize, given who you all are, that two-factor authentication, right? We had problems going from passwords to passphrases, right? So you know that there's going to be problems going from passphrases to two-factor authentication. So how many of you have implemented in a significant way defined differently for many of us, but how many of you implemented two-factor authentication in a significant way in your organizations? I count 5, maybe, right? So in some cases, significant way might be, in front of payroll systems or in front of health systems or something. If you now log into the Indiana University Central Authentication System, you have to provide a second factor, and that second factor for almost all of us is that we have the Duo Mobile installed, and you get a little, little flash up on your phone, and you have to accept, and then you get in. And that's for almost every place where you can actually make that happen, right? So VPN, on student systems, on email, any place where it's technically possible to do that, we have done that. And so somebody might look at that and think, well, that's sort of a security where there's going to be perceived a lot of inconvenience. But what we were able to do, I think, was implement it such that the reaction was more positive than it was negative. So many universities in the States, at least, had direct deposit redirected, right, through phishing scams and what have you. Well, that affected some of our senior leadership, and when that happens, things that might otherwise be perceived as negative suddenly become positive. Convenience is correct, so that's how we were able to do some of that. But, and again, the presentation prior got into this a bit, there is no guarantee. We know that. This is the other thing that some of us in this profession should have tattooed somewhere on our body anyway, or at least on a placard on the wall, is that there are no guarantees and that breaches are going to happen. So one of the questions at the end of the session earlier was, well, you said informal response. Well, what is it now? Is it, I'm paraphrasing the question, of course, but is it formal now or is it still informal? And so I would suggest that if you've gone through some of these, and most of us have gone through at least a few incidents, breaches or what have you, you ought to now have a formal response. You ought to have something that kicks in given certain triggers. And if you don't, then first off, I would think that means that you haven't experienced at least any significant breaches at all. But if you experience significant breaches and you do not now have sort of a formal process with defined triggers, I'm not sure what it would take to teach you that this is something that you will need to happen. So the best antidote for all of this is, of course, information. So if you take in as much information as you can take in, if you use trusted sources, if you know your environment, all of this is information into this magical device that then spits out what you need it to spit out. And so you can see some of the things there. You're involved in all of these, probably each of you. And so you can look at some of those things and figure out why information is needed and where it would be applied. So here's some, I think, a better way to look at some of this. So if you're looking at information sources, first at internal, you have to have a good asset management. You have to have good inventories. And continuing with our survey, how many of you, and clearly this is, I don't want to say easy, but it might be a bit easier for smaller organizations where, the number of assets is a lot smaller, but how many of you think you have a good handle on all of your database and your systems assets? You can put your hand to a list of assets across the entirety of your organization. I see 1, 2, maybe we can get you two to do a presentation on that a bit later on. It's very difficult. We have, and of course, the question you want to ask is if something happens somewhere else, right? If something happens at Purdue, we want to know if that's going to affect us. And so the question is that we would ask our technical people is, do we have that? If that happened on a particular kind of system, a particular kind of software application at Purdue, our question of our technicians would be, do we have that? And then, of course, the technical people will provide you with all manner of jargon, and you have to try to figure out whether that's what was affected or not. The functional staff, then you want to ask, do you do this? So if the problem elsewhere had to do with PeopleSoft or some other application or some specific kind of use of those applications, you want to be able to ask the functional staff, do you do this? Are you using that software in this way that was exploited elsewhere? And then the users, of course, are always ahead of us. This is happening to me. Can you help me? How did I get into this situation? Please fix it. And so that's the other information source, internal information source, obviously, is the users who are complaining about what's happening to them. Externally, there's a lot of different sources, of course. There's the trades. You read magazines. You look at CNN and all manner of different sources where these things are reported. And the question is, are we understanding what the trends are? Do we understand what people are saying? Does it affect us? Is it something that we need to pay attention to? And trends, of course, I think, again, another Captain Obvious statement is trends put you ahead of the curve as long as the trends stay as they're being reported, right? So you got to keep an eye on that. Vendors, obviously, if you have particular software, particular systems, they provide patches. You consult with them. They provide advice. And so vendors are a big source of good information. Government agencies, and again, David and Marianne mentioned this earlier, I think in the U.S. they're getting better. They used to send us these flash bulletins, some of you who get these or got these in the past, and all they really said was, we see something that sort of kind of looks like this, and then we'd have to go off and try to figure out whether we had anything in our environment that sort of kind of looks like that. There was no actionable information in those at all, and we complained vehemently about that, and then they started adding IP addresses. So the thing that we're kind of sort of seeing, it's coming from this list of 25 IP addresses, and so we would be able to load our IDSs with those addresses at least, and so they're getting better. And sharing information out of at least the US DHS and other agencies is getting better, but still they have a lot of information that we could use that we don't get. I'll talk about the system of ISACs, the hub of ISACs here in a couple of minutes. That's helping considerably. Relationships with your federal law enforcement agencies is great. In fact, our incident response manager left Indiana University to go to the FBI office in Indianapolis. And now we have a fairly good source. I don't want to put him on the spot and suggest that he's sharing inappropriately. He's not. But it is a good source for amplifying information if we need to get that from some of those. But then global advisories, of course, we're here at AusCERT. AusCERT is, I know our Carnegie Mellon colleagues have been here, but it's been up and down, and some of the information that you get from them is old and just sort of serves to confirm things that you already know. We're getting more and better, I think, current information from there as well. So some of those certainly are sources. Things like this might impact you sorts of questions. Professional colleagues, you're all sitting here in this conference for exactly that same reason. Contacting each other, knowing each other, meeting each other at these places. Are you seeing this in your environment? And then sharing information like that, I think that's primarily what the REN-ISAC is all about. Trust communities, and again, presentation before this was all about trust, really, and having problems with internal trust yet, which is a little concerning, especially, again, if you haven't formalized your response procedures and the right people aren't at the right table at the right time, that trust might be a problem. But essentially, what you get out of the trust community is more detailed information that the party who's sharing it thinks has some sensitivity and doesn't want it to get more broadly shared. And so within the trust communities necessarily have to be small. You can't have 38,000 people in a trust community and expect the trust to be solid. And so, we talk to other people. Obviously, IU is a member of the REN-ISAC, so we get information from the REN-ISAC, participate in conversations. But in the secure list, there's people asking pretty detailed questions about what other people are seeing and how they're dealing with it. And presumably, with the information sharing guidelines, that information is not out there in the world. And in the old days on the EDUCAUSE security list, for example, things would be shared, and then 20 minutes later, a reporter from some magazine would be calling and asking you about it. That's not supposed to happen in the REN-ISAC trust community. Now, the last thing there is, and we're looking very closely at this, one thing that the ISACs by and large do not do, and that is automated remote mitigation. Now, we're trying to work through this in the Big Ten Conference, which is now called the Big Ten Academic Alliance. It used to be called the CIC, if you care at all. But the BTAA is all the schools in the Big Ten Conference. We're trying to work through this, and it's still, even in the Big Ten and certainly across higher ed everywhere, the capabilities, the capacity and capabilities across our institutions still varies wildly. In fact, some of us farm out our network management and all that still, and really have little to do or say about how our networks are run. But some of the capabilities are minimal, and some of the capabilities are obviously advanced. Those with engineering schools and the security people who rely on their engineering schools, I think, are well advanced. But automated mitigation out of a REN-ISAC out of an ISAC is, I think, at this point unheard of. And so we're working sort of beside the REN-ISAC as it relates to this automated mitigation. And just to put a finer point on that, if you picture a huge Splunk blob managed somewhere, and all of the member campuses feed their logs into that huge Splunk blob, right? The more information you have, the better the view of what's happening, right? So you can correlate information, you can be confident that a certain thing is happening because it's happening in a lot of different places. So if you push all of that into the same blob and somebody does that analysis, that's the first part of it. But then the second part of it is, if somebody sitting centrally in a SOC sees something bad happening to a particular campus, then where we want to be is that person sitting in that central place can actually affect what's happening on the network on that campus, right? So if something's bad happening at Penn State and the central SOC sees that bad thing happening, they want to be able to, the goal is to have somebody actually affect, block, terminate connections, whatever it is, black hole devices, whatever it is on those other campus networks. And again, that recognizes that the more information you have, the better off you are. It also recognizes the fact that a lot of campuses, as I said, still don't have the capability, the advanced capability to do some pretty nuanced things on the networks. And if we can provide that service, then that's sort of where we're going to go. So what are ISACs? I think Mary Ann mentioned presidential decision directives earlier. PDD 63, signed by President Clinton, whenever that was, established this hub of ISACs, and you can see there what they're for. They're trusted entities that share information within the membership. Some of them, most of them charge for membership. I don't think the MS ISAC does, because I think it gets government funding. There's only two that I know of that do get government funding. One is the MS ISAC, and the other one is the Maritime ISAC, which I don't have much to do with, but it's a membership government sponsored as well. I could be wrong about that. I'm going to show you a list, and if anybody knows if any of these are government funded, U.S. government funded, then let me know. But you can see what they're there to do. Many of the ISACs established earlier on also have physical security responsibilities, so they'll come in and take a look at physical security. And the Energy ISAC, for example, the Transportation ISAC have a lot of physical security concerns. The REN ISAC does not do that, at least not yet, and so there's the difference. But the point is getting actionable information into the hands of the people who can take the action, right? So there's a list of U.S. ISACs. You can see all of them there. So how do we get into this? Well, Michael McRobbie, who, by the way, is, I think, born and raised between here and Brisbane, I think, in this area. I still can't do his accent, but regardless. He was in Singapore, of all places, and he was looking at a presentation being done by somebody there, and they were talking about these ISACs, and he did approach the person who was doing the presentation, and what we discovered at that time, again, 2001, 2002, was that there was no ISAC dedicated in any way, in fact, to the higher education and the research networking sector within the U.S. And so we started talking to what was then the NIPC, the National Infrastructure Protection Center, which was part of the FBI at the time. The NIPC is no longer there, it's now DHS. But we started talking to the head of that, the director of that, about how these ISACs work and all of that, and we signed an agreement with them in February of 2002, I believe, to establish the REN ISAC. The REN ISAC does, as I described, the same thing for research in higher ed, or research in higher ed networking that these other ISACs do for their sectors in particular. So among these, most active is the financial services ISAC. You hear a lot from them, though they're sort of splintering a bit and creating a SOC that may or may not be run by their ISAC. So there's some splintering going on there. But several of these, the multi-state ISAC is for state and local governments in the U.S. and again, government funded for the most part, and are very active. I get a lot of stuff from the MS ISAC. Public institutions in a state could belong to the REN ISAC and the MS ISAC, and that, of course, means that we get comparisons all the time about what they're doing and we're not, or what we're doing and they're not. What ties them together is the bottom at the asterisk there is the National Council of ISACs. So Kim Milford, many of you know Kim, is the executive director of the REN ISAC. She attends the meetings of the ISAC Council, National ISAC Council, and that's, I'm not going to use the word governing, but that's the advisory council sort of for the ISACs. So what is REN ISAC specifically? Again, it just goes back to the same thing that we've talked about related to all the ISACs. The point is to get actionable information, actionable, usable defense information into the hands of the practitioners. And we get that, again, from a variety of sources. The discussion list on the REN ISAC is very active around all manner of software. Many of you are on that. I monitor it a bit, but you know that what you see there. And again, it's a trusted environment. The problem with the trust environment is that, as I said earlier, it can't be vast. I don't think you can use vast community and trust community in the same sentence. It just doesn't work very well. And so right now we have, I think, 700 institutional members. That is 700 universities and research centers and hospitals who are members, and another, and representing those, I think we're now close to 2,000 individual representatives of those. So 2,000 people on a list talking about a variety of things. You have to be vetted, but the goal is to get more institutions represented. Again, we want to serve campuses that sort of can't serve themselves, that don't have the capacity, don't have the capability to do a lot of the information gathering and application of defenses. And so we need to grow that. But in order to keep the trust relationships, the trust community intact, how do we grow it and keep that intact? Okay, I think I said that a couple times. We have, again, hosted as a part and parcel of Indiana University. We have a governance board, and a set of bylaws. And so we do have 6, 7, 8 members of a governing board elected out of the membership. And I'm the appointed member for Indiana University for that. And there are a couple of other groups, a technical advisory committee, or a group, TAG, and there's also a membership advisory committee. And those are very active in obviously seeking out and serving the members. The TAG is the technical group that talks about what services the communities need, right? So we want to provide services and we provide data sources that the community needs. We're not just going to sit there and sort of decide on our own what it is that our membership needs. And so we do have a couple of groups that work on that. Again, 530 member institutions, over 1,700 individual members. There's no restriction on the number of individual members a campus, an institution can join. I think IU, in fact, has 15 or 16, perhaps. All of the people in our security office, in our incident response team, are all members. there's a criteria that you have to satisfy. It has to be part of your, it has to be the majority of your job. That is cybersecurity and security and privacy has to be the majority of your job. That's the criteria. So by the numbers, you can see what kind of institutions we have. The number on the previous slide was 530. The number on this side is 544. So between the time I moved those two slides, we gained 14 members somehow. I'm not sure exactly how, but you can see the kinds of institutions that we serve there. And we do have a considerable number of non-US members. The membership is open certainly to the Five Eyes countries. Others we would take it under consideration. I think the last list I had, there were, I think, 5, 6, or maybe 7 Australian universities, institutions who were members. Are there members in here? Well, there you go. That's about 5 or 6. So, so that bears that out. The point to be made on this slide, though, is that, or in this section, is that we don't, when they discover a threat for a .edu, if that .edu is not a member, that information goes to that campus anyway. In fact, if .com is implicated in something that we see, it goes to that .com as well. But you don't have to be a member to be sort of the beneficiary of some of this threat information. One of the best examples is that we have alerts on sites where password files or credential files are pasted in a lot of cases. Pastebin, for example, you'll get an alert and a dump from something found on Pastebin if it has credentials in it that has your domain in there, and that will go to any institution who has, in that case, it's all .edus because we have to stop somewhere as it relates to those big dumps, but any .edus implicated with domains in that pasted credentials file will go to those .edus, and then you do with them what you think you ought to do with them. Certainly you should evaluate those for current credentials, right? And then scramble those passwords and do all of that kind of thing. But that's just an example of where we would take something off of a site and send it to any EDU that's implicated. So RENISEC serves as a CSERT for at least US EDUs. And so you can see the number of notifications done there, total across the quarters. We are well advanced of that already here in 2017. So again, a lot of these alerts are necessarily automated, but there is a good bit of back and forth. We'll drop something on the discussion list, or we'll take something from the discussion list and do some analysis. There's a lot of very active discussion in a lot of different places. People who see something strange on their network will drop that on the list and say, this seems to be strange on our network. Has somebody else seen this? What does it mean? And what have you done? So there's a lot of that going on. But there are some, how do I put this? There's some dark sources. So we first started this, the first analyst that we had, Gabe Iavino, some of you may know Gabe from way back, but I used to say that we're going to tie a rope around Gabe's waist and throw him into the dark side and then pull him back and see what's stuck and what we have to react to. So they do have some sources that we can't really talk about, though I'm standing here talking about them. We won't name them. But we do get a lot of sources like that, a lot of websites that, Pastebin, it just by nature of what it is, stuff ends up on there, but there's other sites that we scrape and send out alerts. Again, some more change. Look at the difference now between 2017 and 2016. I'll stop and given the technical nature of some of this stuff, ignore any questions at this point. But if you have questions, I'll be glad to take those as I go through some of these. So we've had a relationship with SANS for a long time. We remarket the Securing the Human course series, which has been hugely successful. It's an excellent course for a general audience, and so it's very good. We've been repackaging that now for, I don't know, it must be a decade at this point, but that's been a huge partnership with SANS. And again, the more people we get sign up, the cheaper it is, right? So you get 70% off at this point, I think. Somewhere it says 70%. But the more people we get, obviously, the better we can do there. One of the things that we're also partnering with EDGECAUSE on is a cloud assessment, a vendor assessment tool. So, you know, this notion that we're putting all these resources into protecting local assets, well, obviously we all know that that's sort of being pulled apart by our leadership and our functional people saying that, you know, well, we're doing this locally and we're doing it pretty well, but gosh, you know, AWS is so much better, why can't we just put everything there? Or, you know, this cloud service that I come across whilst, you know, reading in bed at night seems like a good idea, let's take a look at that. And so all of that's being pulled apart. And so one of the things that we've done at IU for a long time is we have a 3PA, a third-party assessment program function. And every time somebody in a school or department wants to look at a separate tool that way, then it goes through that process. We send the vendor a questionnaire, a security-related questionnaire, and then we analyze that. And only when sort of we put a check mark on that questionnaire is the school or department allowed to go ahead with that relationship. What we're starting to do more, by the way, which I never thought we would be able to do, is that we're intercepting some of these requests in advance. Before they even go to procurement services, we're intercepting some of these needs. So somebody out there says, in a school or department says, we need to have something that does this, then they contact a unit within the computing department and say, we have a need to do this. And what happens there, of course, is that the computing department and all of the relationships, we're able to say, well, so-and-so school is already doing that, so let's have a conversation with them. Or we already have a university-wide enterprise contract for that, so here you go. But if it's a unique need, of course, then it goes through the analysis and becomes a unique contract, a unique service. But we're trying to intercept those things much more in advance. This is the kind of tool that is, where you ask the right questions, and it's a collective. So if somebody's, the hope is that it's a collective. So if somebody has gone through an evaluation of a particular vendor, then we ought to be able to use that, learn from that, as we are maybe looking at the same vendor, right? So this is what this is all about. The Daily Watch Report is sort of like a CERT advisory. It comes out with general information about where to go and look, what's been happening and all of that. That comes out daily. And so that's very useful. All members get that. But it's one of those information sharing things where you're not allowed to just take that then and share it more broadly. The information sharing guidelines within the REN-ISAC are pretty strict. This has been a problem. We've had people who take things out of the REN-ISAC and share it with other organizations, other people. That's a no-no. Even my own CIO is ticked off that I can tell him what to do about something or what we need to do about something, but I can't tell him where I got it. or you know, it's the old sources and methods thing, right? I can't tell him what the source and method is. I can just tell him that we have to take particular defense about a certain thing. Ops briefs, you can see one of those there. Those are more detailed. They're about more specific things. Some of you get those, I'm sure. So one of the things that we've worked on for a long time, maybe as much as a decade now, is an SES. It's sort of a SIEM. It's now called a SIF, or whatever you want to call it. This is where we take in a bunch of incident information and correlate it from all of our different sources, because again, as I said earlier on, the more information about an incident or about a particular anomaly you get, the more confident you can be that it looks that way and that it's doing those things, and then you can take particular defenses. So we do provide an SES to members. You can either put stuff in and get stuff out, or you can get stuff out. The other thing that REN-ISAC does is tech bursts. These are on a variety of topics. The last one is in fact about bylaws changes, which is sort of a businessy, sort of administrivia sort of thing. And so we do tech bursts on a variety of different things, different topics as they come up. So again, some of these I talked about. We want to change our membership guidelines. We want to reach a broader audience. We want to reach the whole subset of EDUs that have, again, less capability, less ability to do what they need to do. We want to get more of those involved in learning from the rest of us. We have to provide a larger trust environment without losing the trust, which is going to be very challenging, obviously. And then questions, right? There's the REN-ISAC-net. I think I have like 4 minutes or thereabouts. Questions?
Sorry, the app isn't working today, so any questions, I'll come to you with a microphone. Somebody.
Hi, Nicholas Lynch from Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. I just wanted to understand if we're currently talking to vendors on threat. So I guess we've got a program called Threat Central. And does that extend into the vendor land?
It does, but here's the criteria. Relationships between the Bren ISAC and anything else has to directly benefit the membership, right? So we don't sort of take sponsorships, we don't take anything like that. But if we come across something that will help satisfy the mission, will directly benefit the membership, will raise all boats, right? We will certainly take a look at that. Other questions? It's almost lunch for one thing, but I just assume I did such a great job that you don't have any questions.
So WannaCry, take us through, I guess, the process and how you guys responded to that.
We don't have near that much time, right? So, well, what helped us, of course, was that it didn't affect the U.S. nearly as much as it did elsewhere. But we did take in, again, from the REN ISAC. We're a member of the REN ISAC as well as hosting REN ISAC, so we did take that in. We took in a lot of the media accounts. We looked everywhere we could find it. The vector wasn't that difficult, right? And so there were some things that we had already done, so we just made sure we'd blocked various ports at the borders. We've had those blocked for, I don't know, decades. But we did immediately scan the network, which in our network case takes 3 or 4 days to scan the whole thing. But we did scan enterprise systems and so more close-end systems. But again, all of that is dropped. Anything that comes along like that is dropped into the top of a process. And so we have a team that convenes immediately that does the initial triage. We draw in technicians as we need them. We draw in legal people when we need them. We draw in other people, functional people when we need them. And it just goes down through that sort of, that maze where you drop the thing down in there and comes to its conclusion. And then we will block devices. Given the risk, we will block devices out of hand without prior notification. So we do it and then talk. In some cases, we talk and then block. But in this case, the patch was out in March or something, and we thought, all right, well, bad on them. We did some blocking in advance without talking. But again, it's that somebody pulls the trigger on the response when they see something like that. So the interesting part is getting people to see something like that, right? To recognize something that needs to have that process invoked. And we will do that more than we wouldn't, meaning we're liberal in calling the process. And then if 2 steps into the process, the whole thing just falls apart, we just all go home and watch TV and whatever. But in a lot of cases, it doesn't look like it might be something, smells like it might be something, you sort of feel this could be bad kind of a thing, and it's really worked out well being more liberal in putting that process into motion.
Can I ask you a question, Mark?
Yes.
So with all the different ISACs that they've got out there, do you guys interact with each other? So like for a university like myself, we obviously have a large medical area as well as being a university. Right. So I'd assume if we were a part of 2 ISACs, there could be conflicting information. Is there an opportunity for you guys to work together, or does everyone sort of work in silo?
Yeah, there's 2 answers to that question. One is, as I said, there's the National Council of ISACs. So that's, I think they meet quarterly, and they have conversations about strategy and in general and all of that. The direct relationship between ISACs really depends on which. And so some of the ISACs do more governmental work, and so we don't really interact with them that much, which is a problem. But some of them are very forthcoming. We meet with them. The relationship between an ISAC and the MS ISAC, the multi-states ISAC, is great because our membership overlaps quite a bit, which is going to cause that anyway. Our relationship with the FS ISAC is good. With the IT ISAC is good. But really, it's meeting in the middle is where we get the information. Now, we do not, I have to be careful here too, but we don't, you know, we don't get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning from somebody at the FS ISAC. You know, if they have somebody sitting in DHS, we don't get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning on our watch desk about things that they think we should see, and that needs to be fixed. And so it's more strategic, it's more after the fact when we have conversations, so it's not as good as it should be. And then the other answer is, we get information from some of them sort of through individual relationships than we do anything else, but you can't really cite those as official, right? Thank you all so much, and thank you, by the way, for inviting me. This place is great. I really love it here.
Can we all please thank Mark?